Okay, everybody, welcome. Hello. So great to see so many of our new members joining us tonight. I won't repeat all the housekeeping that we did in the last session, but please reach out to me if you have any questions. These guests are going to be available for 3 months in the replay section. So you've got 3 months if you need to revisit anything. Tonight we do have Rachel Baernstone, the founder of Sounds Like Design. And I'll come back to Rachel in a minute. But first of all, I want to welcome you all. I'm hosting tonight from Canberra, which is Ngunnawal country. So I'd like to pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging. And I also like to note for all of these guest sessions that our guests who are coming on are really just sharing their own personal experiences, and I'm reflecting on my experiences as well. And these sessions are general in nature. They're never intended to be directly instructional, and you should always seek advice specific to your personal situation or project or climate. Now, last week we set the scene on why architects matter, or why architects should matter, as we discovered with Flora Samuel. And this week we're going to dive a bit deeper into how to talk about ourselves and what we do from a marketing perspective. And, you know, that can be useful whether you're talking about marketing yourself to the public as an architect, or marketing yourself through your career for a job, or freelancing, or even being an employee in a firm and helping with award applications. I know one of the most common jobs that students often end up working on in firms is the award applications. So this second session in year 2 is a great second piece in the puzzle or in your toolkit for us to really put our best foot forward in our careers and make sure we're making the most of opportunities. So we're going to welcome Rachel as the founder of Sounds Like Design. Hello, Rachel.
Hi, and thank you for having me. It's really great to be here talking to your students and young architects and people who are looking to expand their careers.
Well, I'm really excited to have you. I'm sure anyone who's sort of, up on the architecture socials has seen you or come across you.
So.
And I'm sure we'll talk more about that later on. But I'm really fascinated in your background and how you came to this business, Rachel. Can you share your pathway towards marketing and communications, and perhaps tell us a little bit more about what Sounds Like Design does?
Sure. I think it's useful to say at the outset that I have had a quite non-linear career, and that's fairly common for women in architecture and other professions as well. I studied journalism at RMIT in Melbourne in the early 90s. And I remember one of the lecturers there suggested that we should specialise, we should find an area that we're interested in and become experts in writing about that. And at the time when I was about 19 and 20, I had no clue about what I might be fascinated by or interested in. And I just couldn't see myself finding a topic that would, drive me forward. But later, about 10 years later, I did discover that would be architecture. And in the meantime, I had gone to London because I couldn't get a job in the media in Australia in the early 90s. And I worked in marketing. I worked for Fox Films, and that's a big marketing machine, a Hollywood marketing machine, and everything's done to a formula, and there's a template and there's forms you fill out and you assess your competitors and you set a budget. And it was a really great introduction to the sort of formal system of marketing, if you like. And when I came back to Australia in the late 90s, I got a job at Fox Studios in Sydney, which was a very short-lived tourism attraction. And that gave me another view of marketing in a different sector, like in tourism. And from there, I thought, I don't want to do this for the rest of my life. I actually really want to be a journalist. So at 30, I got my first job as a journalist. And I was a junior journalist working on a magazine reporting on broadcast engineering, which was about the most boring topic you could possibly write about. And that's what made me think, okay, now I want to specialise in architecture. So I had a friend who was an architect. She introduced me to Davina Jackson, who at that time was editing Architecture Australia, and we chatted about her path into writing about architecture, and that inspired me. And so I went and did a course that she'd done, which was the Masters in Architecture History and Theory at the University of New South Wales. And I finished that and I got my first job editing a building magazine, and I started talking to architects, and I realized that, this was something that I was very passionate about and would sustain me for years to come. And so I've been a freelance journalist writing about architecture for 20 years, basically, since that time. So as far as Sounds Like Design goes, we moved to Perth in 2016. My husband got a job here. We came from Sydney. And at that time, I thought that I perhaps should think about diversifying my offering a little bit, because I was worried that I might not get as much writing work living here. In fact, the opposite is true, because there are very few architecture writers in Perth. So I've managed to pick up magazines that I didn't work for previously. But at the same time, I've started working directly with practices and architects to help them refine the way they communicate. One of the things that drove me to do that is I've always thought as a journalist that architects are by and large pretty poor communicators with the broader public. And I've been really keen to try and address that and to teach really fairly simple but useful communication skills so that architects can have more impact, more influence, more reach, more business, can generally build the profile of their profession. And the reason I want to do that is I think we need good design more than ever because of climate emergency. And so this is a way that I can feel like I'm making a positive contribution to trying to tackle climate change.
Was there a pivotal moment where you had a bit of an aha and went, oh my God, architects are just so terrible at this, I need to help them?
Yeah, there was actually. I have been to a lot of the Institute conferences. I've been to, Sydney, Melbourne, Tasmania. There's one in Perth. There's been a few in Adelaide. And it's always struck me at those events where there've been up to 1,000 architects in a darkened lecture hall watching other architects talk about beautiful buildings and ideas and theory and why project managers are stealing so much market share and, all these issues that are really important to architects. And one year, I think it was 2014 in Melbourne, one of the architects stood up on stage and said, you know what, here we are in this dark room talking to ourselves again, and we should be out there on the street talking to each other. And I came home and said to my husband, I've got it. I need to do this. And so it took a while. It took from that moment until we moved here and things falling into place. And in the meantime, I entertained doing a PhD, and I talked to someone at RMIT about that. And they said, no, what you want to do is really a business idea. Just go and turn it into a business. And over, 7 years since then, that's what's happened.
Fantastic. So, as you know, last week we had Flora Samuel, who
I know she's one of my heroes.
Yeah, she was fantastic to talk to. And so we spoke at length about better communicating the value of what we do to the general public from more of that theory background, as well as being better at evidencing what we do and our value. And so you share a similar message through your business, but definitely focus on your content being helpful to architects and their firms and finding clients. If we start there, in our community of members of students and emerging architects, we definitely have some who are already doing a bit of freelancing or have a plan to start their own firms once they get registered or even before they get registered. For those people, what are some of the common mistakes that you see young firms making as they set up?
I think, and this is not specific to architecture, because the same thing happened when I established my freelancing business and then with Sounds Like Design as well. When you're starting something new, you don't tend to be very discerning about the kinds of work that you'll accept, or you're not targeted about the kinds of things that you want to do. You're new and you're trying to prove yourself, and you need to gain experience. And for those reasons, you don't usually start out with a specialty. I mean, there are exceptions to that, but a lot of people start offering very general services across a range of different building types and perhaps scales, or a lot of architects tend to start in residential because you can do that on your own, and then they try and move into public or civic or, larger commercial projects. So I think one of the things is that you start out as this very general, jack of all trades type architect. And over time, some people become specialists in a particular area, but their communications don't reflect the way that that's getting refined over time. So it's not immediately apparent to someone who comes to the website that this is someone who, has a really good handle on multi-generational housing or on sustainable design, or is a passive house specialist, or whatever it is that sets you apart from others. And I think that architects, the public don't understand the value of architecture. They can't really differentiate between a draftsperson, a building designer, a project home company, a custom builder, an architect. They don't understand the nuances between those different service providers, which means that they lump architects in with all of those other service providers. And so as a person running a business, you need to really clearly differentiate what it is that sets you apart and why your potential client would want to engage you. What are they going to achieve by working with you that they may not get from another architect down the road or a project home builder? And that's really understanding what your niche is, or your specialty, or your particular area of expertise, and then being able to turn that into messaging. So if you are becoming known for something, then definitely shout that from the rooftops. And if you are a person who wants to continue to be a generalist, try and find the unique points of difference in your process, or in your outcomes, or in the way you collaborate with others, because every architect has a unique take on the business of design and the process of design. And your clients or potential clients are going to form a relationship and rapport with you. And so you need to explain to them what it is that makes your offering special and interesting and appealing to them.
And so should you try and chisel out messaging as early as you can, practically?
I think that, so there's basically 4 key questions that underpin every kind of marketing. And you should definitely spend some time at the early point of setting up a practice to think about what your responses are to those questions. And then you can make those into outward facing messaging so that future clients can quickly recognize whether or not you're a good fit for them. And there's a couple of reasons for that. I'll go into those in a moment, but I'll just explain the questions and we'll come back to them as well. So the first question is, who do you wish to speak to? So that's about identifying your audience. It's about understanding what it is they need. So if you're offering alts and ads, for example, you're looking for renovators. You're not looking to talk to, project managers designing shop fit outs. So you want to tailor your communications to the people that you specifically wish to buy your service or product. So that's the first thing. Who's your audience? The second one is, what is it that sets you apart from others? So in marketing speak, that's called your unique selling proposition. So what are the things about your practice, your service, your offering, your outcomes that make you unique? The third thing is, how do you plan to spread that message? So again, if we go back to the example of renovators, you might do that through magazines that renovators read, or you might think, well, renovators are always on Pinterest looking for information about new bathrooms, so that's a good place for me to put my message. Or I know that there's a renovating group in Sydney called Sydney Renovating Mums. Now that's a fantastic source of potential contacts if you're located in that geographic area, and you can be active in that group, and you can share advice, and you can point people in the right direction, and you can point out the difference between a draftsperson and an architect, and you can share and add value in that way. And then people will come to understand, oh, there's someone who's helped me in the past and is friendly and accessible and speaking my language, and I'll call them. And so that's all about understanding your audience and what they need and where to find them. And then the fourth very important question is, what do you want people to do once they've got your message? Do you want them to call you? So in the case of the people who are watching this talk, it might be, I'm an architect and I'm trying to get a new job or a different job, and I want to be in this particular field. It might be health, say. So I want the people who are recruiting at the big companies that do health projects like Woods Bagot, BVN, Hassel, Cox, I want them to know about me. So where am I going to find those people? On LinkedIn is the obvious place to create a profile if that's your intended audience. And then you can be creating content that is speaking directly to those people and thinking about what you want them to do. So you want them to recognize you. You want them to see your name in events that you're presenting at conferences, or that you're an expert, or that you've been involved with a particular project. And then when you are at the point where you're going to be submitting your application, they'll already be familiar with you. So you're a couple of steps ahead of someone who's completely unknown to those people.
That's it. Yeah, that's awesome. They're being proactive about your not job seeking, net throwing, I guess.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's a form of networking, that you're going to come across people in your professional life who are going to be able to introduce you to others or to recommend you to others. And you definitely want to take advantage of those situations in as natural and organic way as you can, and hopefully in a way that is providing value for both parties, because you never know when one of those relationships might become very useful in terms of helping you make the next step.
Yeah, absolutely. You also have courses and resources to help architects with their award entries.
Yes.
And I think that's an interesting one to talk about, because a lot of students and graduates often help with the awards.
Yes.
And I can know from experience that they're usually a mad rush, and the director usually has not much time to think about them.
Yes.
So people working in them take notes on this. And then when you're doing it, and say, well, I was in a session with Rachel Baernstone.
Yes.
And she said.
Absolutely.
So what are some of the common misconceptions that you see with how firms approach competitions?
Well, as you say, everybody does them at the last minute. So that's absolutely the first thing that you can try and have some influence around changing. And one of the things that you might be able to do is I've put together an 8-step guide, and it says if you are applying for awards that traditionally start having submission deadlines in February, so the Institute Awards, the Houses Awards, IDEA, some of the big programs, their deadlines are in February, March, April. So if you know that, it's really helpful to start thinking in November and December, right, what are the projects for the awards next year? What do we need to do so that we can be ahead of the curve? So we need photos, we need some text, we need all of the credits, we need to compile all this information. And if we get it all in one place, then we can do the first entry, and then we can repurpose that for the next one, and then we can repurpose again for the next one, and then we can turn all of that stuff that we've put together into the marketing materials that are going to support our awards entry. So that's publishing, social media, all sorts of things that can happen in conjunction with those awards entries. So you can download this 8-step guide from my website, and you can put it in front of your employer, and you can say, I've heard that we should be starting to think about our awards in November. So would you like me to think about how we can start preparing now? So that's amazing. The first thing. Yeah. And then the second thing is, because everybody does them in a rush and they're not thinking strategically about how am I going to get the best return on my investment, because awards are usually one of the most expensive marketing exercises a practice might undertake in a year. You might be paying anywhere between sort of $400 and $800 to enter. You've paid for your photos. Sometimes you're paying for a copywriter. There's the time of the people that are putting the entries together. So those expenses add up. And I really want architects to get the most bang for their buck on those expenses. So if you're going to do that, you really want to be strategic about where you're entering. So you don't just go, oh, they're due next week. Here, let's do this one. Oh, there's another one due after that. Let's do this one. No, get my calendar and look at the calendar for the year and go, okay, the 3 programs that are going to serve us best because they speak to our audiences, because we want to talk to people who are building sustainable homes, is houses, the Sustainability Awards, and Dulux, for the sake of argument. So those are the 3 that we're going to focus on, and we're only going to do those, and we know the dates now, so we can schedule all of this prep work, and it doesn't have to be a mad rush, and we can be really considered and intentional about what we say, who we say it to, where the message is going, and that way you're hopefully going to be able to get more out of your awards because you put more in. And the third thing that I would say about awards, and this is really important, most architects write their entries as if they're only speaking to other architects. Now, that's often the case because the juries for many programs, especially the institute programs, they are other architects. But some of the programs like houses, design files, sustainability awards, they might have people on the juries who are not architects. Sometimes there are journalists, there are other disciplines. And so you want your entry to be able to be read by someone and understood, whether or not they understand architecture and have an architectural background. So your awards entry should speak to three key audiences. Yes, to your peers in the profession, but also to the media, because you really want to get some coverage out of this effort that you've put in. And thirdly, they need to speak to your future clients, because if you're just putting material out into the world and only architects can read it, you've almost wasted your time, because architects are not going to engage you to produce another project. Only future clients are going to do that. So you definitely want any future client who might have a chance of coming into contact with your awards entry, whether it's through media coverage, an exhibition, stuff on your social media, other people's social media. You know, there's all sorts of ways that future clients might see an awards project. You want them to be able to read it and understand it, and to think, this architect is talking my language. And for that, you need to speak their language in the entry. So that's really important. And that's something that I can't explain in the course of this discussion, but I have put together this CPD workshop that you can access via my website, and it teaches you how to speak to those three audiences. And it also goes into some details about what juries are actually looking for, because I analyse the programs each year and go through and say, okay, this year the main themes are around sustainability, climate resilience, and how we're all living in a different post-COVID world. So when you understand that those are the sorts of key concerns of juries, you can start to frame your responses to talk about how you've used those things to inform your design.
Yeah, amazing. And it's, you know, it's such a what's the word? I was going to say pandemic, but that's not a good word. In university, there's just this dire atmosphere of archi-speak.
Yes. Yeah.
That fuels and trains us to speak this way. But as a marketing person, I think, yeah, I'm not surprised that you look at us and just go, what are you doing?
It's so funny. I've got a great example of that. So at the moment, my course is running, and I've got some architects who are going through my course materials. And one of them left a message in the course platform this morning saying, I've just watched the section on Archibabble and I already need to go back to my client questionnaire and make some changes. And I said, that's fantastic, because you've recognized that this material that you've put together for clients to be able to give you their feedback is actually alienating them even before they start to give you answers. So if you can bring it back to a level where everyone can engage with the ideas, we're all going to be better off if we can have more easy and accessible conversations about why good design is important.
If we did conversation back to careers, I know you spoke about careers-based messaging when we spoke in preparation for this. So what is careers-based messaging?
Well, I would say that I would define that as any sort of intentional and deliberate messaging that you craft and create to either advance your career or to pursue your own particular area of interest. And I think that it's useful to, it goes back to this notion that we were talking about earlier around whether you're a generalist at the very early stages of your career or whether you already have a sense of, what direction you'd like to pursue, or an interest that drives you that you're very keen to explore, in a professional capacity. And so I've got a great illustration of that from my career. So when I was doing my master's, the thing that got me really fired up was sustainable design. And there's subjects that we did around urban design and sustainable development. And this was in 2003, and I was really I was a fangirl of Professor Peter Newman, who is based here in Perth and who, is a world-renowned expert on livable cities and all sorts of things. So those were the things that really lit me up and that I got excited about. And as I got to the end of my master's, I became aware of an opportunity to apply for a Churchill Fellowship. And I don't know whether has that come up in this group before?
No.
Okay, well, this is something that is a fantastic thing to tell your audience about. So Churchill Fellowships were set up when Winston Churchill died in 1967, and a group of passionate Australians went around and door knocked, and they collected $1 million to set up a fund. And every year this fund allocates 100 travel scholarships to Australians to go overseas and pursue research of their own choosing. And the idea is that it's something that you can't necessarily research here in Australia. You go and talk to experts overseas, and you come back and you share what you've learned with your profession or industry, or, to benefit the people of Australia. So I found out about these, and I thought, well, clearly I need to get one. And I was very interested in sustainable design and affordable housing. So I put the two together, and I put in an application, and I got it, and I was funded to go overseas for 10 weeks to study sustainable, affordable housing. Now,
amazing.
Yeah, I didn't realize at that time that I was essentially setting the course of my career, because when I came back, I went to architecture firms and I told them what I'd found, and I gave presentations and I wrote articles. And at every opportunity since then, where there's been a chance for me to either promote sustainable or affordable or both housing, or to advocate for better quality social housing, or increased sustainable housing guidelines or regulations, I have done that. And so that was something that was exciting to me as I was leaving uni. And 20 years later, I'm still, hugely passionate about those issues. And in the meantime, because I've applied myself to learning more and making connections with people in those sectors, I've become a bit of an expert in those topics. And unbeknownst to me, that journalism lecture that told me to specialise, I didn't know I was going to be a specialist in sustainable and affordable housing at that time, but that's how things have transpired. And so this comes back to this idea of careers-based messaging. If you have a passion and interest, something that, fuels you, or that you're hugely interested in finding out more about, then follow that. Make opportunities to bring it into your work or to make connections. I've got a friend who's an architect, and she was working in a sort of a generalist firm, but she really wanted to design hospitals. So she made herself known to the head of health design at BVN, and she went to conferences, and she acted as if she was in the health sector, and she got there. And so it's about understanding your purpose, I suppose, and working out what the messaging or how you're going to communicate that to others, so that they'll be able to help you and support you on the way. Yeah.
Fantastic. One of our own members here, Chaim Leader, has a good example of that too, for perhaps students and graduates who are feeling a bit intimidated by this advice. Chaim reached out to me, interested in sharing some of his mini interviews that he'd been doing as a graduate, and it was a tactic to find a job. And I was desperate for content at the time. And Chaim has been doing these series of interviews with graduates and architects about getting started in their career. He has a chat to them, and then he writes a very punchy 5-point little interview. And I've been publishing them, and he got a job. And of course, you can never say whether it's directly related, but I bet it helped, showing that he had that ambition. And now he's continuing on taking a bit of a different tact about developing your career. And then through our connection, I'm helping him connect with other people that might be interested in publishing his articles. And, little simple things like that, I think, to put yourself out there and show initiative can only be a win.
Absolutely. And the other thing is that he would be learning from those interviews that he's doing. When you're taking in information from other people, you're like, oh, I can use that, or I can apply that, or that's a really helpful thing. So as well as it being useful in terms of advancing your career, the information that you're obtaining, and that's the same for me as a journalist. I've interviewed 1,500 architects over 20 years. I've learned a lot about architecture from having these conversations with architects about how they do things and what they think about a particular issue. So that's really helped me build a picture of what I think the industry is and what it needs, and therefore I'm able to help develop those resources for architects because I have a fairly good understanding of where they're at.
Yeah. I want to pause for a moment and just talk to members, particularly the new members, and just remind everyone that these sessions are really for you. So if you imagine yourself sitting in a room with Rachel and there's only a small group of you, and she's brought here really to answer any of your niggling questions. So as we continue through the rest of the questions, there'll be time at the end to ask your own questions. So have a think about how you can take advantage of this opportunity to speak to Rachel. And then if you pop your question in the chat, I'll ask you at the end to, you can turn your video and microphone on and ask Rachel yourself, or let me know in the chat if you'd rather I ask it on your behalf. Rachel, we've heard this term elevator pitch a lot in careers. What is an elevator pitch, and should we have one?
Everyone has to have an elevator pitch. And architects need them more than most. So an elevator pitch is just a really quick and simple way of describing what you do, or a product or a service. And the idea is that you could quickly explain yourself or your service to someone in the time that it takes to go, up or down in an elevator. And the reason that this is such an important thing for architects to grapple with is architects really struggle to distill what it is they do in a simple sentence. I was at an event recently and someone was asked, so tell us about, and they went on and waffled and took this tangent, and it took 5 minutes. And at the end of it, I was yawning and I was like, oh God, please, you're killing us here. And so I get that architecture is complex. I'm not talking about dumbing down. I'm not talking about, simplifying or negating the incredible amount of thought and effort that goes into architecture. But I do want architects to be able to really neatly and easily say, I'm a sustainable architect and I build new homes in Canberra. That's as easy as it needs to be. Or, I work for a big architecture firm and we create city changing projects. Perfect. So, whether you're an individual building an elevator pitch or whether you're a practice trying to come up with one of these very simple descriptors of what it is you do, and it's just as important for practices to have a tagline on their website that quickly describes what it is they do, who they serve, and what makes them special. And the reason that it's so important on a website, and this translates into the real world as well, is that we've all got shrinking attention spans. People don't have time to sit and wait for you to give a 5-minute explanation so that they can try and glean if there's anything useful in there for them to take away. And we know with websites, for example, so if someone is doing research about a firm that they want to use, or they're looking for someone to do a renovation for them, for example, and they're looking on social media and they use the link to bio to go to your website, we know that people spend an average of 8 seconds making up their mind about whether or not the information on that website is speaking directly to them. And if they do like it, they might spend longer and they might poke around and they might read a few things and, look at various projects and think, oh yeah, this might be for me. If they don't like it, they click away, they go back to Instagram, and they might never come to your website again. So a tagline that sits right on the front of your website, above the fold, on the first image, that says, we are architects that build libraries in Sydney's inner west. Perfect. You need to capture attention really quickly because it's fleeting, and we're also time poor, that people don't have the capacity to wade through communications that don't serve them.
Absolutely. And what about if you're job seeking? Should you have a similar kind of elevator pitch that you're ready to say when you're meeting other architects and networking?
Absolutely, yeah, because you want to be able to quickly communicate what it is you do now, and perhaps where your ambitions lie, or what your interests are. And I think that, this comes back to the idea of purpose, or knowing what it is that motivates you. And one of the really great resources that people can use to start thinking about that, if they're not yet sure, is to look at Simon Sinek's work around what's your why. So he's written a book called Start With Why, and there's a TED Talk also called Start With Why. So a TED Talk is 15 minutes. So that's a really easy way to grapple with an idea and to see if it resonates with you. And if it does, you might then buy the book and do some of the exercises in it. But if you're not sure what your purpose is, that's a really useful resource that you can tap into pretty easily to start that process of thinking about how am I going to frame and position myself if I'm looking for a new job, or just networking generally, because you don't need to have your eye on the next job to be good at communicating about yourself.
Yeah, so you don't necessarily need to say I'm blah 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 interested in blah and I'm job seeking. If you've already got a job, you can still build the same network and put the same interests out there a bit more subtly if you might be looking for your second job.
Yes, and you might be doing that as a way of building the brand of the practice that you work for.
Yeah, true.
We've talked about architects or students or grads doing awards entries. I think that if you were someone who was an asset to a practice because you were good at marketing or good at communicating, so many practices haven't yet got their ducks in a row around marketing. So if you were able to say, oh, look, I've seen these resources and I'd like to try this on our Instagram, or I think it'd be helpful to have a case study or an article, or, do a presentation, or speak at a conference about this project. There's all sorts of ways that you can help to build the profile, both of yourself and of the practice that you're working for. And again, that's only going to be good for architecture, the profession more broadly, if more people are having informed conversations about the value of good design.
Yeah, absolutely. The next question's a bit of a curveball, so I'll be interested to see what you say.
Sure.
What about if we're in a review with an employer? Do you think we can apply some personal marketing strategies in that scenario?
Yeah, I do. I'll preface this by saying that I am not a person who knows a lot about HR and employment and that kind of thing, but I certainly know of some really great resources around communications in that area. So there's two things that I would mention. And of course, if you are a person who has a strong grasp of what makes your approach to working special or different or unique or particularly appealing, that's going to be useful when you're trying to get a job or seek a promotion or try and be accorded more responsibility. So communication is going to help in that sense. There's some really fantastic employment and review specific resources on the Parler website in the Parler guides, and they are absolutely brilliant. And actually I learned a lot from reading those Parler guides about how you might ask for a promotion or a raise or put yourself forward, or all sorts of things. And I think that that's been done under the Parler banner, and there's all sorts of evidence about how women are less likely to ask for raises or put themselves forward. And so for women, we need to take responsibility for our own career progression. And I encourage everybody to look at those resources. They're not just for women. Anyone can access those and put those strategies into action. The second thing that I would say is that I have had some fantastic conversations with a person who's a former architect who now runs a business consultancy in Brisbane. Her name's Jenica Dix, and her business is called Management in Action. And she has some really fantastic ideas around hierarchies and networks in businesses and across disciplines. And she's writing a book about that. And she and I got chatting about this exact topic of how you might do a performance review or a request for a pay rise. And she wrote an article about how you can change your communication style so that you can present yourself as a person who is looking to elevate your own career at the same time as elevating the practice that you work for, so that you're both working towards the same purpose and goals. And I really thought that that was a pretty innovative way of approaching what can sometimes be a very combative conversation. And it's about bringing it back to common ground. And, you know, our shared aspirations for this practice are X, Y, and Z, because we both want to do well. We want the business to do well, and we want to personally be able to excel in our job. So how can we work together so that I can get my pay rise and we can improve the health and sustainability and profitability of the practice? So that's I really liked her approach. I'm not saying that it's easy to do that, because that's a cultural shift or it's a mindset shift. And it's not necessarily something that as a young person working in a practice you might be able to affect. But it's certainly something that you could ask an employer to consider, or you could go in and have a conversation with your team around, you know, I like this idea, what do other people think of it? And, you know, it may not happen overnight, but over time it might be possible for you to influence the way those conversations are conducted. So that article that Jenniken wrote on my website, I'll put it in the chat now, and I'll share it with you, Sarah, afterwards, and we can, you know, people can grab it and read it later.
Brilliant. Thank you. And coming up to the last couple of questions. So be brave, everyone. Ask your questions. Otherwise, I'll assume I'm asking everything you want to know and we'll just keep chatting. So speaking of resources, Rachel, you've got some fantastic free resources on your website, and you have a really great newsletter. Can you tell us about those and where to find them?
Yes, sure. So as we've already touched on the awards resources, so there's 3 things there that you can download to improve your awards. So there's the calendar, the 8-step guide, and there's a questionnaire template. And so this is it's a Word document. It's got about 10 or 15 questions in it, with some are multiple choice and some are sort of responses that your clients can write. And the idea behind this is that I would love every architecture practice to send a marketing questionnaire to their clients at the completion of a project. And so this is not a POE exercise. It's a, how did we serve you? What could we do better? What did you learn about this process? What was missing from the way that we explained things to you? And that information can come back into your practice, and you can feed it into your process, and you can improve things going forward. And you can also use those insights that you learn from your clients to turn into outward-facing messaging, because when you use your clients' words, future clients recognize themselves. It's not you telling your future clients how great you are and all the things you can do for them. It's your past clients, those testimonials and reviews. And we know with social media and the way commerce is happening online now, that social proof, it's called, it's someone else speaking about your service or your product. It's worth so much in this day and age. And we also know from research that the Institute put out about 3 weeks ago that 71% of clients want to find their architect from a recommendation, from a trusted referral. So if you don't have referrals or testimonials from your past clients for your new clients to be finding you, you could potentially be missing out on 71% of the business that's out there in the marketing pool. So I want everyone to send a questionnaire to their clients so that they can gather feedback. And I know that you're not going to sit down in front of a blank piece of paper and go, oh my God, what am I going to write in my questionnaire? So I have put the questionnaire together for you, and you download it and you take my branding off and you put yours on, and you add some questions if you want to, and you take some off, and then you send it to your clients, or you set it up as an online form. And that way you're starting to gather this testimonial type material, which you can then use in your messaging on social media, in publishing, on your blog, on your website, all over the place. And it's free. You didn't have to pay for it. And it's only cost you the time that someone spent doing that. So that's a fantastic resource for architects. Also because the questions are based on my questions that I ask when I'm doing interviews for magazines. So they're the questions that are designed to get the most useful information out of someone in the least amount of time. So please go and help yourselves to that. And as you said, I have a newsletter. So I've got this newsletter called The Drill, which I put together on Fridays. And so every Friday morning I sit down, takes about 2 hours, and I read about 60 email newsletters that I get sent. And through the week, I'm scanning Twitter and LinkedIn and the newspapers. And I put all of these articles together in this newsletter on Friday so that you, as the architect, can skim the headlines and instantly feel smarter without even reading an article, because you can go, oh, there's a new regulation around embodied carbon happening in the UK. That's interesting. Oh, they've just introduced new COVID regulations in Victoria. That's interesting. And such, my competitor has started a new project over there, and those people won that competition, and these awards entries are due next week, and there's an event coming up and a book I have to read, and blah, blah, blah. So you get this distilled version of the news for the week, and hopefully it gives you ideas around your marketing and things that you want to be saying to your clients. And if you're very smart about it, you can start using that material in your outward facing messaging to make you look like the expert, because you can say, did you know that, the government has introduced new legislation around, insulation, and we can help you navigate this because we're the experts in insulation and we've already changed our processes to align with this. So talk to us, so then you're like the person who people will go to as their trusted advisor on architectural issues, and you'll look super informed, and you didn't have to spend a lot of time looking super informed. You just had to read The Drill.
Yeah, it's a brilliant newsletter. It takes a lot for me to open a newsletter. I get a lot of them, and most of them just go straight into my trash. But I've recently become a big fan of The Drill because, as you say, I feel like you've done all the work for me, and I can just skim. And as you know, I have repurposed at least, a couple of things that you've shared into our own content. So, definitely also, get on that one.
Also, someone asked me today on Twitter, do you have a source for that? Like, can you post a reference? I was like, of course. Here you go. It's in The Drill.
Yeah, exactly. We have a question that we ask every guest who comes on to join us. What is your number one piece of advice for young architects?
Oh, that's a fantastic question. And I was thinking about it, and it's very similar to the advice that I offer to all architects, but I've added something to it for your audience. So the advice that I offer to all architects is never work for free. Do not give away your smarts, your expertise, your experience, your knowledge for free. So that's around this notion of, we touched earlier about, at uni, you learn the Archie speak and it's hard to break out of that when you come out. I think you also get inculcated into this culture of, long hours, late nights, weekend work. And sometimes when you go into practice, that continues, not all practices now. And, firms are becoming much better at the unpaid overtime problem, but 20 years ago it was rife. So there is a sort of accepted maxim in architecture that a lot of design work is unpaid. So, think about competitions where you're asked to put your best ideas forward and you don't get paid for participating. Tenders and requests for proposal often require you to come up with a design response, and there's no contractual arrangement for a fee to be paid. You're bidding for work basically with your best ideas. And to me, this leads to a state within the profession where there isn't a value attached to what architects provide and deliver. And architects are guilty as other people in the construction industry of perpetuating that. So I'm very big on not working for free. And I wrote an article about that, which the ACA picked up recently, because I was looking at the nexus between fees or no fees and working for free, and communicating the value of architecture to a broader audience and architects' well-being. Because if architects are working for free, racing to the bottom on fees, underbidding on projects so that they'll win the work, there's no ability for people to have sustaining and meaningful and purposeful and profitable work in that kind of environment. So that's the first part of my advice. Don't work for free. Second part of my advice is to be generous with your knowledge. And that might come across as being contradictory, but I don't mean to be contradictory. I want you to think about all the things you learned at university, all the stuff that you know about why good design matters and how good design is transformative and why it's important in a climate emergency world. And I want you to share that knowledge with as many people as you can in a way that they will understand. So not in architecture speak, in language that man on the street, lady in the pub, I think there's a great internet thing about tell it as if you're telling it to a primary school child. Take your communication to that level and explain the value of what you do and why it's important in a way that everybody can understand. And the reason that I want architects to get better at doing that is when we have a population and a community that understands the value of good design, we're not going to have this proliferation of big houses on small blocks with no trees and black roofs, and those houses are going to require air conditioning, which is going to make climate change worse, and they're going to become uncomfortable over time. And, there's all sorts of reasons for abandoning that way of building. And architects have a much better offering that doesn't have to be more expensive. It doesn't have to be exclusive and only for a small part of the population. I have a tagline that architecture is for everyone. And I believe that the benefits of good design are just as valid for people living in low-income housing as they are for people living in, Point Piper in Sydney. So I want everyone to have access to good design. And for that to happen, architects need to get better at explaining what it is they do and why it matters.
Not so long ago, I think it was seen as a really negative thing to share your intellectual property, but there's a real change in that.
Sarah, and I think that perhaps for your audience who are people at the start of their careers, they might not understand the transition that's happened around that, and it's probably helpful for me to quickly
please
outline that. So when I started writing articles about architects in 2002, I would go into a practice and I would say, tell me about this and why is it important, what's special and what's innovative and what have you never done before and how have you built on ideas that you developed earlier and how are you going to take this forward, what's going to be in the next project? And they're like, oh, we can't tell you that. And I'd say, why can't you tell me that? Well, that's our intellectual property. We can't share it. And I'd take a deep breath and go, okay, good. So how am I going to write this article then? Because you're not letting me talk about it. So that persisted for about 10 years. I used to get this sort of wall around, no, well, you can't publish that. We're not going to tell you that's ours and we're going to protect it here very carefully. With the advent of Parler, which for those who don't know is the research that was done around women in the profession, and that started in about 2010, 11, I think, and reported in 2013, I think. That was the point where for the first time, people across the profession from various levels in the hierarchy, from very young, unregistered, graduate, student, right up to people at the upper levels of management in practices, all of a sudden had this level playing field to talk about what it was like to be a woman in the architecture profession. And that opened the floodgates for everybody to start talking about what it was like to be an architect. And it's only since Parler made that space and created a safe place for those conversations to happen that people have literally transformed and become collegiate and collaborative. And we will share this and we will have a conversation where we're all on Zoom and we're talking about our experiences and learning from one another and sharing insights and being generous. So that's only been happening in architecture for about 8 years. So it's really early days. And I think, a lot of ground has been made up in that 8 years because now we have this fantastic spirit of sharing and a culture that encourages people to support each other and to elevate others, because by elevating others, we all rise. You know, that rising tide lifts all boats. It's true of architecture as much as anyone else. And so I want to see architects supporting each other, not competing or not taking the view that, they're stealing my business or they're taking my projects. And that comes back to this idea that I've talked about previously around a scarcity mindset and an abundance mindset. So a lot of architects are operating out of, there's not enough work and only 5% of houses are designed by architects. And so I've got to, struggle and starve to get my projects and blah, blah, blah. Well, there's plenty of work. It's just a matter of architects winning more of the work. Architecture can take from the market pie that is currently being served very well by project managers and custom home builders and project home builders. Let's start talking about taking back or taking some of that space and market, because we need good design.
What an inspiring way to end. Before we finally wrap up, Rachel, I'm just going to remind everyone about what we've got coming up. So next week, a member roundtable session on mental health in the profession. So for the newbies, the member roundtable sessions are a bit different to this in that it's all us here with our cameras on. There's not often much of a set agenda other than we prompt discussion and share our own experiences. So it's a way for us to tap into the incredible experience that we have between all of you in here. All of you have useful things to share, so we can tap into that. And then the next guest session is the lovely Jesus Garcia. He works at BKA Architects in Sydney, and he's going to be talking to us about his experiences coming to Australia as an international architect, knocking down all of those cultural barriers to find a job, but then also going through the registration process in Australia as an internationally trained architect. And our member Varun is going to actually host that one, not me, because I recognise that it's a situation that I really cannot relate to and have no experience in. So I'd rather someone who can relate a little bit more to run that conversation. I think that's much fairer. Thank you so much, Rachel. I think that was one of the more broader value conversations we've had. Everyone from our first and second year students who are just getting a idea of the industry and perhaps thinking about job seeking, right through to those approaching registration or thinking about starting their own firms. There was so much value in there. I'm sure everyone will be following your newsletter.
Excellent.
And
please subscribe.
Thanks so much for doing what you do as well, because I know you do it out of passion, but it adds so much value to our industry. So thanks for joining us, and thank you.
Thank you so much for hosting, Sarah. It was really lovely to be invited.
Lots of fun. All right, I'll see you around, and I'll see everyone else next week.
Great.
Thanks,